Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me and letting me into your radios. This is Kevin Lepine with Live Unleashed. We've got a great show. We have William Arendell, of course, joining us at the bottom of the hour. In a few minutes, we will be joined by local author, juggler, MC, all-around great person, Andy Martello. He's going to be talking about his new book that he wrote, and we're going to be talking about living unleashed. You can reach us anytime if you go to VegasHypnosisShow.com. Once again, that's VegasHypnosisShow.com. You can email me at info@VegasHypnosisShow.com. You can also add me on Facebook through there and anything else. Your comments, your questions are always appreciated. We'd love to talk more with you and find out what you're looking for. Now, today on Live Unleashed, one of the things that I really wanted to touch on was influences we draw in our life. There is something to be said for the fact that you will become like the 5 people you hang out with. There's always been, of course, we've all heard the parents say, you will become your friends. There's a truth to that. And a lot of times we get hit with negativity. And a lot of times you have people talking to you about different negative features and telling you what you can't do and what you can't accomplish. I know that throughout my own career, there were many, many people who stood up and told me that I couldn't accomplish my goal. I couldn't make a career out of what I loved. I couldn't do any one of 100 things that I wanted to accomplish. And the common denominator are these people who are telling you that you cannot accomplish something? Are they people who are doing things themselves, or are they people who have stopped themselves from accomplishing their own goals? One thing that I've learned is that hang out with successful people, hang out with people who've accomplished their goals and their dreams, those are the ones who tend to encourage you. Those are the ones who will help you to find roads and avenues and different ways to really reach out to achieve your dream. I never mind critiques. I never mind criticism. It's always important. Sometimes you really want people to help you focus on your goals. You want people who will be there to guide you. And there are times that we all need someone to kind of focus us if we're not going down the road we should be. You can find really great friends who are out there accomplishing, doing. People love to mentor. In my own life, I have encountered mentor on top of mentor who were achieving the things that I wanted to do. And they were able to lift me up. They were able to show me things, and they were able to be positive about it. One of the goals to living unleashed, one of the goals to leaving behind negativity is to honestly leave negative people behind. When you realize that you're not getting anything from a relationship, be it a romantic relationship or be it a friendship, be it a mentorship, being even just acquaintances. If all you're getting is negative, if the person isn't building your life up, you're not required to keep that person in your life as an influence and a mentor. Sometimes one of the best things you can do, sometimes the best way to add to your own life and to live unleashed is to simply cut away the negative people. And I think that we all hear different negatives in our lives. We're all told what we can't do, or a lot of times we're told something is way too difficult. And we'll look at those difficulties and we'll look at those as a roadblock that you can't surpass. A very good friend of mine once used the phrase, everybody wants to be a bodybuilder, nobody wants to lift heavy things. And sometimes just taking those first steps to lift those heavy things makes all the difference. Which brings us actually to our first guest, a guy who has had to really climb and work very, very hard to accomplish a number of different things. When I first met him, he was part of the Spike and Hammer show at the Four Queens. He has toured all around the country, not just doing his own show, but also doing the MC for The Price is Right Live. He's also probably one of the only active plate spinners out there, which is an amazing act, which is one of the things that's kind of fallen to the wayside. And also he's done one of the hardest things that somebody can do. I've known a lot of people who've said that they want to write a book, but they never actually do it. They never get past writing that first page or that first chapter, let alone getting it out there. and he's done all of that. We're going to talk about his new book. Please welcome Andy Martello. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It is always nice to be had, Kevin.
Well, I'm glad. I'm really, really glad you're able to come in. I want to talk about the book a little bit first, and then we're going to kind of go into some history for some different things. But tell us a little bit about the book, what it is, and how to get it.
Okay, it's called The King of Casinos, Willie Martello and the El Rey Club. It's available at Amazon.com, and of course you can get it at my own website, AndyMartello.com. That's also where you can find info about me, juggling, all that fun stuff.
Now, the El Rey Club, what was it?
It was a little-known casino resort out in Searchlight, Nevada, about 60 miles south of Las Vegas. That was around between 1946 and 1962, and unbeknownst to the rest of the world, until I started digging around, it turned out to be a very influential place. A lot of the things they didn't start doing in Las Vegas until the 80s and 90s, they were trying to do at this casino back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
How so?
Among the things that this guy, Willie Martello, the owner, that he wanted to do, at one point he wanted to turn the entire town of Searchlight into a massive resort town. He wanted to make it a themed town, almost in the way that Laughlin is today. He wanted it to be a full-on Western town with, he was courting the family dollar back in the 50s and 60s. He wanted to bring in an amusement park. He wanted an entire motel with daycare just for families and just for kids, so the kids could have their own little mini resort while the parents were, boating, fishing, things like that.
Almost like a Tombstone, Arizona.
Absolutely, yeah. So it turned out to be, a lot of people think it's a template. It turned out to be a template for Laughlin. Okay. And in fact, I have differing reports. I spoke to one of the last people who co-owned the El Rey Club with Willie Martello. Her name is Bonnie Cantor, and she vividly recalls Don Laughlin meeting with Willie Martello because he was thinking of starting his own little town in Laughlin on the river, and vividly remembers Willie Martello screaming at the top of his lungs, "Oh, that's a terrible idea. It will never work." I've been fortunate enough to speak to Don Laughlin about this, and Don Laughlin, and if you ever speak to Don Laughlin, it's the greatest thing in the world because he talks just like this. He talks exactly like you would expect a grizzled old casino owner to talk. And when he spoke of him, he always goes, he laughed. He kind of gives that this hearty Western, I don't recall that, Andy. I don't recall meeting him at all, but he was a lovely man. So, it somewhere in between the two lies the truth. But he wanted to do a lot of great things. He was planning on building full-on golf resorts with homes on every green. He was planning on doing all sorts of amazing things. The problem is he just didn't have the funds. He had a great example of a dream that was realized to a point, but the place came burning to the ground in 1962 and just never quite recovered from it. But he was a wild man. A lot of things happened there. Francis Coppola's first movie was filmed out at his club. At one point, it was a brothel. There were some great things. Hollywood celebrities hung out there all the time. The Rat Pack, Betty Grable, people like that would just be seen just sitting there in the casino, not even performing, just hanging out because it was a nice, quiet place to relax and nobody bothered them.
Now, let's go back a little bit. Let's kind of talk a little bit about you, and then we're going to talk about you as an author. Now, you started off performing where?
Let's see. I started juggling when I was 10 years old. That was the same year that I was put into a musical. My dad taught speech and drama at Maine South High School in Park Ridge, Illinois, and they were doing a Bye Bye Birdie, needed a 10-year-old kid. And he, of course, did not want to be accused of nepotism, so I actually had to audition for my dad. And if it weren't for the fact that my mom was egging him on, he probably wouldn't have cast me. And it was from that point on that I was like, I got to do this on-stage thing for the rest of my life. And I learned how to juggle when I was 10, and I started making money at it when I was 15. My first quote-unquote professional gig, my sister, once again, nepotism, my sister hired me to juggle at a church craft fair where she was also had a booth and was selling some of her wares. And let's see, I worked about 8 hours of strolling juggling, and I made approximately $15. Nice. And I thought to myself, holy cow, this is it. This is what I want to do the rest of my life. By the time I was 18 years old, I'd already started doing birthday parties, school events, Cub Scout events all around, and got out of high school and went straight to Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Clown College.
Down in Sarasota?
Venice, Florida, yeah. Okay, Sarasota, yep. Venice, and that area. Spent a little time doing promotional work for the circus, and then hooked up with other shows, other variety shows, and just kept plugging away, doing corporate events. You name it. I always tell people the joke I always make is I just look at it as misplacing my paycheck. I would wake up in the morning and I go, where did I leave my paycheck? Oh, I bet it's at that Cub Scout troop. Or, oh, I bet it's in Butte, Montana. Or so I would just go there, pick up my paycheck, and then come back home. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Now, what really kept you motivated out there? I mean, it's not the easiest thing to do, and of course, you get 1,000 naysayers when you go into an alternative style career.
Sure.
What was it that kept you motivated when it was tough and it was lean?
Like it is right now, for instance. A couple things. First off, I think it really helped that I was. As smart an individual as I am, I think it really helped that I was too stupid to realize that there's plenty of other things I could do. I remember my dad was a high school teacher for 25 years, and he was very concerned that I wasn't planning on going to college, and very, very adamant about making sure I had something to fall back on. And I will never, ever, ever forget the greatest youthful, stupid thing I ever said to my dad. And I said, well, Dad, if I don't fail, I don't have a need to fall back on anything, which he just kind of smiled and tousled my head. And soon after I got accepted to Ringling Brothers, and he figured, okay, well, that's a pretty good start. Nice. But the real motivation was, aside from that, is just, you're an entertainer yourself. I mean, there's plenty of things you've done for day jobs along the way, and nothing is as much fun. When you are a performer, when you're an entertainer, when you're a creative person, nothing in the world is more exhilarating and more rewarding than going out, telling your jokes, doing your tricks, whatever it is that you're doing, singing a song, and people respond to the positive. You know, it's not I'm not an applause or an attention junkie, because as you've seen me at parties, I am perfectly happy being at a party in the corner, not talking to a damn soul. I like the fact that it's something I was born to do, and while there are many other things I do well, that's what I feel comfortable with. That's what I love.
One thing that I've always found interesting with performers is when you think of a party of professional performers, you get this image in your head of this wild, crazy, insane, hangover-style party.
Absolutely.
But when it's all professional performers, it's usually the most mellow affair.
Oh, absolutely. Well, because it's a room full of people that know that the show is over.
Yeah.
You know, because everyone assumes, we always hear about the Hollywood party, like you're talking about. It's just nothing but, but boobs and beer and hot tubs and things like that. And while I can't lie, I've been to a few of those parties, but usually those are thrown by regular people who just thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun to invite the entertainer friends? When I go to a gathering of primarily entertainers, there are, of course, some people who that's just their personality. They love to be the center of attention. But you're absolutely right. A group of entertainers having a party, we have more fun sitting around, having a few drinks, and just sharing stories back and forth of odd things that have happened to us. We're not going to be whipping out a deck of cards. Hey, I just learned this great new pass. You got to see. No, who cares about that nonsense? We want to be around people. The thing that cracks me up about, one of the reasons I don't do nearly as much acting as I used to do is I can't stand actors. Because these are people who don't realize that Steven Spielberg actually isn't at your coffee shop. You know, I understand to be prepared for opportunity. Always be ready for that great opportunity.
I've always said that luck is a skill.
Yeah.
I've never truly gotten lucky because nobody's ever knocked on my door and said, excuse me, do you know anybody who wants to be a hypnotist?
Right. Yeah.
But
yeah,
I've gotten amazing lucky breaks while I'm out there working hard.
Sure. And I am just as happy if I do encounter somebody who, hey, kid, I'm going to make you famous. Great. Please, by all means, you do that because you'll probably have better luck at it than I will. But in the interim, when I say thank you, good night, the show's over. I go home. I want to, you need to decompress. It's kind of like when people put in an 8-hour day at work. I don't care if you're an accountant or a brain surgeon. When you go home, you want to go home. And I've never quite understood the entertainers who just always have to be on.
Now, we mentioned, about like the negative things you'll hear coming through your career and the stuff you have to rise above. One thing that I've learned, though, in my own path, and I'm gonna ask you about this, is as I was rising up, I would always see people who were a level above me, and those were the ones who were the most successful were the ones who wanted to mentor other people, who wanted to be successful.
I think there's some truth to that, yeah.
Now, who's been there for you to go, hey, I see what you're doing. Have you thought about doing this and help lift you up?
That's an interesting question for me because I I know a lot of entertainers, and I have a lot of friends in the business, and I tend to keep more of them as casual acquaintances than I do as confidants. When I was younger, up until both parents died, both my parents at different points, they were the mentors. I remember one time I only asked to borrow money from my parents, fewer than 5 times in my adult life, and it took me well into my late 20s to ask for that first time, and it was only like $200, but I was like, oh my God, I can't do that sort of thing. There have been a lot of entertainers that I admire. The ones I like are the ones that you can talk to, and you don't have to, I hate coming across to somebody, I should say, as though I want something from them. One of the greatest times of my life, Johnny Thompson, of course.
Oh, yeah.
I've only met him maybe 3 or 4 times. The day I met him happened to be at his 75th birthday party here in Las Vegas. And that was my introduction to him. Oh, happy birthday, you don't know me, surprise. That was it. And we ended up talking for almost an hour or two because he was just, this guy's done everything. He's been everywhere, and he spent as much time.
Now, for those who don't know, Johnny Thompson, amazing comedy magician, one of the guys who I would say pioneered comedy magic.
Oh, absolutely.
In a lot of ways. Also a guy who probably one of the living historians of magic.
That's very
like
true.
a walking, talking Google of the world of magic.
He's met everybody.
So I'm actually amazed right now that you're able to get out of a conversation with Johnny in less than 2 hours.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Because he's one of those guys who wants to share everything.
Oh, sure.
If you ask him what time it is, he will teach you the history of a watch.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, and he will. And I just, people like him, that he was just as happy talking to me and getting stories from me as I was getting stories from him. And I tend to learn more from the people that you can hang around with casually. There have been some folks back in Chicago. There were a lot of great friends of mine, still to this day, some magician friends, a guy named Jeff Bibick. I love bouncing ideas off him. There have been a lot of entertainers that I've never met that gave me the best advice in the world. If I ever get to meet George Clooney, I am going to shake the man's hand, because for years you've been on auditions. You know how dreadful. I hate going to auditions because, first off, I always knock them out of the park. I rock the daylights out of these auditions. They're laughing, they're clapping. I've had standing ovations from the people auditioning me. And then I don't get the job because I'm always convinced that I'm just there to entertain them in between the actual candidates, And another thing I don't like about auditions is you show up at one, whether it's acting or a skill of some kind, there's 200 people in the lobby who all look exactly like you. And as soon as you walk into the room, all 200 of them, they hope that you suck. It's nothing but negative reinforcement. But he had the best advice in the whole world, which I don't remember if I heard him say it on an interview. He said, no matter what the audition is, you should be prepared. Definitely be prepared. Do your best. But the absolute worst case scenario you can find in this whole situation is you won't get the job that you didn't have when you woke up that morning. That's the worst thing that can happen. Best case scenario, you walk away with a new gig and maybe an opportunity that comes ahead of you. So go in, rock it, and walk away. Put it out of your mind. Don't even be counting on it as, I need this job. No, you don't need that job. You don't have it already.
And usually there's a learning experience in there too. You get to watch other things happen. You get to learn more about what some of the casting directors are looking for.
Sure.
But yeah, it's any of those auditions. And my favorite thing is that him and George Clooney and Anthony Green from ER, of course, starred together in Attack of the Killer Tomatoes 2.
Yes, not even the first one. The sequel. Yes.
Yep, the Return of the Killer Tomatoes. I mean, you're talking about a guy who, when you talk about George Clooney, he talks about it over and over about how before ER, he was ready to just call it quits. It's just, but the perseverance, you
just keep at it. I've learned a lot from other entertainers while I was on stage, either bombing or doing well. And I always tell people, it's good when you have a great show, but you're supposed to have those all the time. You're going to learn something from the awful show. The awful show is the one where you learn the most. But I've had a few opportunities where, just being dumb green kid working on a circus, having no idea what was going on. I had it happen once where I was on a circus and there was a huge blizzard that came in and there were 6 acts on the show. two of them made it to the date, myself being one of them, and the other being a show owner, and he had 2 animal acts. So essentially, we had to fill 90 minutes. And he walks up and he's like, "Andy, I don't know if you have any extra stuff with you." And I'm like, "Well, what do you need?" And he's like, "Well, can you do 6 spots in the show?" I'm like, "Of course I can." Now, at the time, it didn't dawn on me that I might not have 6 full 10-minute spots, but I broke it down, and I'm like, I did a very good job, and saved the show that day. And it didn't dawn on me till afterwards. I'm like, that's a kind of a Herculean thing, because I know how much time I have in the bag that's sitting in the trunk of my car right now. I know I can do an hour out of that bag anywhere, anytime, anything. And at the time, I didn't realize it, because that one day where 4 or 5 of the acts didn't show up, and I got pressured to do it and got paid a little extra, thank you. I learned a ton that day. I'm like, it's better to, when you have a great 6 minutes of comedy, if you get on national television, they're going to instantly make you cut that down to 3. But I'll tell you one thing, it's not so hard to cut out something as it is to fulfill your full requirement. And if you have the extra and it's good quality, then you know where you can work, you can do things. And I learned a lot from experiences like that.
And when you have that enthusiasm, especially when you're out there, you're working, you're doing the road gigs, that enthusiasm, people notice it.
Sure.
They really do. And they go, all right, here's this person. And honestly, I don't care what profession you're talking about. If you have that honest enthusiasm to learn, and you have the desire to listen more than talk sometimes, there will always be somebody who notices that and goes, oh, listen, here's a way to get to that next step.
Sure, absolutely.
Now, you've done talk about Herculean events. You wrote a book.
I did.
Now,
and I've regretted it ever since.
Well, I mean, everybody talks about writing a book, but they talk about it.
It's funny you mentioned that. Robert Graysmith, the best-selling author of the Zodiac books and Autofocus, and he's just written tons and tons of books. They all end up on the bestseller list. He kind of befriended me via email a few years ago when he was working on a book that had a storyline that coincided with the research I was doing on this El Rey project. And we just started emailing back and forth, and he was nothing. I mean, there's a mentor. This guy went out of his way to make sure that, I finished the book. It doesn't hurt. I still have it. I refuse to delete it, and I refuse to print it, because if I print it, then it's all too real. But I still have an email from him saying, you're an excellent writer. You should do this. A New York Times best-selling author telling me I'm good at something. I'm like, okay. But he sent something to me just the other day, and I'm very, very proud of this book. Even though I know there's some typos in it here and there, and there's reasons as an entertainer you're going to pick apart everything once it's done.
Oh, of course.
And I told him, I said, hey, I'm really proud of it. I'm sending you a copy. I hope you enjoy it. And he sent me this great letter saying, he worked for the San Francisco Chronicle for many, many years. One of the biggest newspapers in the world with some of the greatest journalists that the world will ever see. And he said, you should be proud, because I worked with some people who, all the time I worked at the Chronicle, some of the biggest names in journalism, in writing, all of them said, someday I'm going to write a book. And he said, to this day, I'm the only one who has. And that's huge when you stop and think. There are people who've written untold millions of words and have readership across the globe and haven't actually sat down and write a book. And I think part of it is I just didn't realize I should or shouldn't write a book. I just fell into the greatest story never told and thought I should tell it.
And it's always fascinating to me, because I've learned this. If you take 100% of the people who say they want to live a dream, 90% of them, 95% of them will talk. Only 5 to 10% will actually take that first step.
Oh, sure.
To do it.
Nothing is more frightening to a person than actually getting what they want. Happiness scares the daylights out of people. They love the idea. I can't tell you how many people hate their jobs. And I'm like, well, you could do something you like. Yeah, but I can't. I got kids. Well, your kids will be fine. You're a good dad now. You're a good mom now. You'll still be a good mom afterwards. You just maybe you'll not buy the expensive pasta. You'll buy the medium level pasta. Whatever. You will be a good, but you'll live longer if you're happier. At least that's what they keep telling me.
Well, now, so you got the idea for the book.
Yes.
Based on?
I discovered there was a photograph on a museum wall in Las Vegas, back when I used to vacation here, at a place called Las Vegas Gift Shop and Museum. It was at the Neonopolis complex, and now they've got an antique store next to the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop. And I walked past this photo 3 times, and my wife at the time kept pulling me back. And I always tell people there's a moment in every husband's life when a woman, his wife actually says, "Can you really be that stupid?" and it happened to me, because on the picture, I thought it was the picture that's on the cover of the book is this old rundown casino. It said El Rey Club, had some cool 1940s cars on it. And it took me 3 times before I noticed there was a sticker on there that said Willie Martello's El Rey Club and Brothel on the way to Laughlin. Now I can't stop looking at this picture, because the only 2 words I see now are Martello, my last name, and brothel, which, those are the cool things. and now I can't stop. The remainder of the vacation, I'm like walking around talking about how I could inherit the family business. I could be a casino magnate. I could be a pimp, for God's sake. All this nonsense. And I just promised myself when I got home, I would do a little bit of homework, see if I could find out if the place is still open, B, if Willie Martello was still alive, and C, if I could gather even a poker chip, just some memento, from something cool to put on my wall and start a conversation. And I posted my findings on my weblog at the time, and it was only within a matter of weeks before people were just coming out of the woodwork. First off, to yell at me going, he wasn't a pimp. He did this. And people were telling me stories about how he employed many people and saved a lot of lives by giving them jobs, and how he built a swimming pool and helped get a baseball team for the kids. By the time I was done, I was convinced I had lucked into a story about a man who could heal the sick and raise the dead, And I just remember I was like, wow, I would just jot down more things, and eventually I'd talk to family members, and there was a moment where Willie Martello's nephew, Bob Martello, sent me an email saying, "Hey, see if you can find a guy named Jerry Schaefer. He made a movie, a topless movie at the club. It was scandalous and interesting all at once. I don't remember much about it except for the plot." I'm like, okay, what's the plot? Plot is a cowboy falls off his horse, hits his head, and every time his head hurts, everything around him turns into a topless woman. That's the plot of the movie. I swear to God, that's the plot of the movie. So naturally, having nothing other than a name, but not a name of a movie, I go to the Internet Movie Database, and I find a movie called Tonight for Sure, which came about roughly the right time, had the same plot as described by Bob, and Jerry Schaefer is misspelled, but I'm like, okay, this could be it. And then I look down, and it had listed as the director of the movie, Francis Ford Coppola. And now I'm like, what? This can't be true. And so I'm doing a little more homework to find out if he is involved in this movie somehow. And I remember as I was sitting there, my hands are shaking, because this is just too unreal. I mean, all these silly little things I found were interesting, but now we're getting into some good stuff. And I remember sitting there with all my desk just cluttered with El Rey memorabilia and badly drawn out notebooks and unorganized paperwork and stories and things. And I said, God, somebody should write a book about this guy. And then I looked at my desk going, you idiot. You should write the book about this guy.
I want to ask you about 3 pages in the book.
Okay. The first and the last and the one in the middle?
Exactly. So the first page, how'd you do it? How did you just go, that's it, I'm doing this?
When people ask questions like that, I remind them, when they ask me especially, like, how long did it take you to write the book? I have 2 answers. It either took 8 years or 90 days, depending on your point of view. 90 days because when I finally sat down and started organizing it and put it in order, once I got it going, it was 90 days before I had my first draft. Now, it took me 8 years to gather the research, and I've had 6 or 7 drafts, maybe 10 drafts since then. But getting back to Robert Graysmith, best advice ever, and I will share it freely if anybody ever wants to write. Because I'd been writing since I was a kid. I've written a lot of opinion columns and humor columns. I was a columnist for the North Las Vegas Voice for a while. You could still find my work on several internet magazines. So writing wasn't the issue, but it kept becoming a daunting thing for me to organize it. How do I want to tell this story? And Robert Graysmith sent me an email, and he said, just write a page a day. It doesn't have to be good, doesn't have to be bad. Just write 1 page a day. And he said after 300 days, you'll have a book, or 200 days. It depends on the story. He's like, but you'll have a book in less than a year. And what he didn't tell me is that once you start that, the first couple of days really was just me sitting down, writing a page. What he didn't tell me is after you've done that for a few days, you can't just write a page anymore. Suddenly, you've now got yourself trained. All right, now's the time I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write my 1 page. And you get to the end of that 1 page and you're like, okay, there's a little more. So I'll just keep going until I'm done with this story. And after a week, I was writing 20 or 30 pages a day. I was writing full chapters in the course of, a couple hours at a time. And, it wasn't perfect, but I had already, by that time, I had a nice outline. I knew the points I wanted to get across.
And now we're getting to the second question is, so the middle. You're halfway through, you're finding a voice for the story.
Sure.
It's starting to really, really put itself together. How are you feeling at that point? I mean, is it still overwhelming because there's so much more you want to tell? Is it underwhelming because you don't know where you're going next?
No, at least in my case, I set out to kind of tell the story the same way. If you've lived in Las Vegas, especially a long period of time, anybody who's lived here for a longer period of time than you, they want to tell you stories. It's like sitting around at a coffee shop and they just want to tell you a story about something funny they saw a tourist do, or something. Hey, did you know the guy who opened up the Pioneer Hotel and Casino? Did you know he did this? And so when I set out to write it, I told myself immediately I wasn't going to do a standard history book. I'm going to relay the stories as they were told to me. I'm not going to put them in any sort of linear order. I'm going to just write them down and then I'll arrange them later. And I knew there were parts that I wanted to get to, like the talking about the prostitution. Everybody thinks that's the story, and that's all this guy was known for until I showed up. And I told myself, no matter what, I'm putting this big meaty chapter about whores and prostitutes. I'm putting that at the end of the book. There are things I just knew I wanted to do. So the more I got along, I was actually very depressed when I actually felt like I had finished the story.
And then that brings us to the next question: the last page.
Last page.
And of course, there's revision on top of revision,
course, yeah.
But that moment where you put 30 at the bottom of the page, where you go.
Yes, there's a little bit of before I wrote the epilogue, which technically was the last page. When I knew I was done with the story, I was happy as a pig in manure. I really was. I was because I reread that one page over and over again because I love how I tied the whole thing in. In my head, I feel like I told the story well, and then anything that comes afterwards is like, because I was actually crying when I wrote it. There are moments when I was writing certain chapters and certain parts that the emotions got the better of me, and I had this happy tears coming out when I wrote this one last page before doing the epilogue, and I was like, that's it. Oh my God, it's soup. I have made cake. I've done it. And then I kind of got sad because I'm like, I started doubting immediately I had enough for a book. I was like, there's no way. This isn't a book. I mean, it's only, but of course I did. And you just get past that as you start going through the actual process.
Now, the name of the book again for everybody?
It is The King of Casinos, Willie Martello and the El Rey Club. If you you can get it anywhere. Any online bookseller will have it. Amazon.com, my website, andymartello.com. And if you're in Butte, Montana, and you don't want to order online, go to your local Barnes and Noble and just beg them. They will order any book you want. So.
Also, if you go to VegasHypnosisShow.com, there is a link to my Facebook. Of course,
you're
on my Facebook as well.
Absolutely.
Very, very easy to find me. And one point before we bring William Arendell onto the show, just something that you mentioned that I want to talk about, then we're going to go to commercial. Libraries. If you request it, they'll order it.
That's right. Exactly. And I tell people all the time, please go to your local library. Ask them. They will buy a copy. And I actually just sent out something to libraries today trying to get more speaking engagements at libraries. If anybody wants a really fun, unbelievable, unreal, fun lecture or a discussion, I hate calling myself a lecturer, but I will do that, do a book signing there, and any library that has me there, I will donate up to 3 copies per library if they would like, as long as I get to be there and spend an hour talking and signing and things like that. But otherwise, go to your local library, ask for The King of Casinos by Andy Martello. They will order a copy because they want their patrons to read, as do I, oddly enough.
Andy, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go to commercial. We'll be back with William Arendell on Live Unleashed. Hello, Las Vegas from Hypnosis Unleashed. All Las Vegas locals get half off every night at the show, Tuesday through Sunday, 8 p.m. Come and join us for Las Vegas's wildest hypnosis show. Watch your friends get turned into rock stars, watch them do the craziest things, or come and be hypnotized yourself. This show has won all the awards here in Las Vegas, and we want to show you why. Come join us every Tuesday through Sunday night. VegasHypnosisShow.com for more details. That's VegasHypnosisShow.com.
Monday Mayhem is back at Gene Woods Racing Experience Go-Kart Track. The stakes are higher than ever, and the winner takes all if you've got what it takes. The winner will get to race a real Thunder Roadster at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway in an actual race. So be there every Monday. First race starts at 7. Come early to register. We are located at 121 East Sunset Road at the Sports Center, across from McCarran Airport. For more information, call us at 702-270-8100. That's 702-270-8100. You can visit us on Facebook, or you can go to our website at racingexperiencelv.com. Once you race here, you won't go anywhere else. Monday Mayhem is back.
Hey, it's Roxy from the 702 Rock Show, right here at VegasAllNetRadio.com. Listen to my show every Friday, 4 to 5 p.m. to hear about local artists, musicians, fashion designers, and more right here in Las Vegas. So tune in every Friday, 4 to 5 p.m. to hear me, Michelle Roxy Davis, right here at VANR on the 702 Rock Show.
Welcome back to Live Unleashed. We've got Andy sticking around the studio. We may have a couple more questions for him, but now it's time to bring on live from New Orleans, one of my best friends, a licensed social worker, amazing therapist. Please welcome back to the show your co-host for the second half, William Arendell.
Hello. It's great to be here, and I really think Andy had a lot of great things to say. A lot of great things. I really love that part where you said that your agent, I think, told you that, all that happened if you don't get the interview is that, or the job, is that you don't have a job that you didn't wake up with in the morning. It's a great way to,
Well, I can't take full credit for that. Yeah, it's all George Clooney. Yeah. He's the genius. He is the genius. But I'm happy to repeat it because it really does make my life easier.
Oh, it's the George Clooney line.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. He said. I think he said it on Inside the Actor's Studio.
And it's also just one of those great reminders of why dwell on the negativity of, you're losing something you didn't have in the first place.
Well, yeah. Once it's done, it's done. I do the audition, I rock, and then I go home, and I'm like, I'm glad I did that. It's changed how I approach so many of these types of events. So I think it's a really valuable piece of info.
But I think I also think that's true, Will, in so many other areas of life where people will get, bent up on, well, what if I don't accomplish this? What if I don't get what I want out of this situation right now?
Yeah. Well, Andy, let me ask you a question. Were your parents pretty positive people?
Yes. Well, they were certainly very encouraging people, and really good positive outlooks on life. They like any other family, they had their own foibles and trials and tribulations. I can't say they were perfect by any stretch, but as far as among my older brother, my younger brother, and my older sister, we're all people who just kind of woke up one day and decided we were going to dance to a different drummer, and they never once discouraged us from doing any of that. They wanted to make sure we were happy, well-rounded. We didn't have to be rich nor famous, so long as, if your bills are getting paid. My dad always told me there is no shame in making a living. If you have to go and work at a fast food restaurant, go work at a fast food restaurant, and you can always leave that and go back to what you love. And they were very, very encouraging people. I know nobody in my family would be quite the same had either one of them not have been as encouraging as they were.
And you're onto something that really, really kind of drives a lot of people, and that's that. When you look at 2-year-olds and little kids, they really start to imitate their parents very early on. They imitate what they speak, the way they speak. They'll try and imitate their voice. They imitate their phrasing, and during that early part of life, if you're around negative people, if you're caretakers, parents, whatever, even daycare workers are really negative people, you'll start to see little 2-year-olds and little 3-year-olds start to imitate that, and that's the beginning of what causes this inner voice to come in. And I find a lot of successful people have a positive inner voice, or they're so dead set on overcoming a negative inner voice. and Christopher Titus even talks about that in his in his comedy routine. And that creation of that inner voice is the beginning of a lot of success for people, or a lot of failure that starts out very early on, because it's what creates those excuses. The beginning of the book, there probably were many times where you just said, no, I'm not going to do this. No, I can't do this. All the things that we make up. And when our parents are positive, we start to imitate that at an early age. We take that on, and we become that. That becomes that inner voice. If you look at people when they're 30 or 40, they're saying some of the same things to themselves that their parents said. And even if their parents weren't negative to them, but negative to things around them, this is terrible, that's terrible, that's terrible. The mind really learns to point out the negative, point out the failure, point out how that's not going to work. And people come in and really, really start to do that to themselves.
Well,
and that's what. Go ahead.
Let's look at those people though who didn't have that positivity there in the beginning. How can you reframe that in your mind? How can you go, I've heard all these negative things. I've been told what I can't do. I've been told what I can't accomplish. How do I look at that voice and go, thank you for your input, but I'm not going to pay attention to that anymore?
That's really the beginning of it, is right there, is to stop realizing that inner voice represents reality. And what happens, there's this thing in our head, this mental thing called salience. It's what stands out. And that mental voice starts to dictate what stands out in our environment. It chooses whether we see the positive in something or see the negative. And so just by starting to say that I don't necessarily believe that inner voice, that inner voice isn't always right. And for a lot of people, they got to start on a journey to start to disprove it, which is a really hard journey. Back in the last episode, I said it's something about getting mentors and people to help you, and this is where some of the things you talked about is starting to get those other mentors around you. And sometimes in your environment, that's a priest, that's a teacher, and you start to embody their voice. When you're around, positive people, you start to take on their voice. You take on the voices of your friends, and we know this because you can think about what a friend will say and get that right off the top of your head. And so you want to start, the first is, you want to start to move away from your complainers and get towards people who are seeing the positive. And when you're a negative kind of person, or you see the negative all the time, these people are going to annoy the out of you. They are going to annoy you. And that's a good sign, actually. A big moment in my life is I was in my late teens, early 20s, and a friend of mine, I looked at him, I said, you got a pair of rose-colored glasses on. And he looked at me and smiled and said, yeah, and I'm not taking them off either. It took me a little while to really understand what he meant by that. And he was another extremely successful person. He was actually one of the people who taught me hypnosis. And so that's the beginning of it, is starting to really fight that voice and to start to question it. To start to say to yourself, maybe there's another way to look at things. And for some people, that fight is going to take them a couple of months, and to start attach themselves to a mentor who's going to help them change that.
Well, I think it's difficult as well, and some people think it's impossible because they've been so negative and they've heard negativity all of their life, and they don't know how to appreciate somebody who is accomplishing something. But one thing that I've noticed in my own career was I would say that I wanted to do something, and I would attempt to do it alone, and I would get nowhere. But then I would start, I would start approaching, I would start talking to, I would start hanging out with, and I mean just sitting there at their feet and listening and learning from the people who were doing the things that I said I wanted to do. And next thing I knew, I was doing it. And it's not like any one of these people picked up a phone and went, oh, here, I'm going to get you the job you wanted. But being around those people and seeing what they were doing and learning from them, I think one of the things for me was realizing they don't have a magic wand. They don't have a genie. They've just learned how this part of the world works, and they're willing to teach that to me as well.
If I could add something,
yeah, please.
I think a big part of it also is, and some of it just comes with age and maturity, of course. I mean, I had a friend as a kid. He was a great blues guitar player, but he was, like a young kid, and I always thought he was going to grow up to be a musician. And he didn't. He went off, had a family, did all these things. I bumped into him years later, and he was playing a little club somewhere in Texas. And I'm like, holy cow, I've not seen this guy in a long, long time. And he was playing blues. I'm like, why are you doing this now when you could have been doing it all those years? And he said, well, I'm old enough. I get what the lyrics mean now. and which was such a great thing to say. And I think part of it is recognizing the things that will make you happy, knowing when you can go for it, and also a big thing is your view of success shouldn't be somebody else's view of success. When I was, I was so much closer to being rich and famous when I was 18, between the ages of 18 and 23, than I was between the ages of 24 and soon to be 44. And in my 20th year of making a living as an entertainer, I was very, very down about this fact. And one of my entertainer friends, he said, wait, did you just say you've been making a living at it for 20 years? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how I've been paying all my bills. And he goes, well, then you're already a success. That's the hardest thing in the world to do. And it just changed. It changed how I looked at things because, I'm doing well. It's very hard for somebody to admit they're doing well and they can do better. And now you can do better because you've been doing so well at this point.
And the problem that I always had, and if anything ever leashed me, it was that I would look at what somebody else accomplished, and I would be upset at myself that I hadn't already accomplished what they had.
Sure.
All the while never going, wait a minute, I don't want to be on the path they're on. I don't want to live the life they're living. And when I stopped and just looked at my life and realized I was doing the things I wanted to do, I was living by the rules I wanted to, if I compare my life today to where it was yesterday or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I can appreciate what I have, and sometimes internalizing success. And Will, you know this about me. It was a very hard lesson to learn, the difference between internalizing your success and making your success external.
Yeah. And I think there's at the end of the Jerry Seinfeld's Comedian, there's a great conversation between Bill Cosby and Jerry Seinfeld about just this thing, about the nature of being successful. And, getting there is the very act of getting there is when you feel like you've gotten there. And the very nature of what the mind does is that it makes that a moving shell game.
I'm sorry. It's just so easy to get jealous, especially as in entertainment, but in any business. You see somebody else who you, for whatever reason, think isn't worthy of that success, which he may or may not be. That's not for you to decide. But it's so easy to be envious and be jealous and things like that. And put it aside. What are you doing? That's the important thing. What are you doing today?
And as soon as you're jealous of that person, you have now completely eliminated the ability to learn from that person. And you've also just wasted time and energy being jealous of somebody that could be better spent growing your own internal success.
Sure. I'm especially, and you know this of me, Kevin, I am a big fan of referring other entertainers, especially if I can't do the job. I am happy to refer it to somebody who can, because I want, especially in this business, I want everybody to make a dollar and a dime in this business. And in theory, that will come back to me. I like to think that some of the people, maybe not so much in Las Vegas, because there are some really petty people out here, but I try and refer good people that I've worked with because, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't make that gig. They didn't want me, but they'll probably want you. I think you're the person for the job, so please, here's their number, call. And I think that helps. I mean, it really does. Being able to.
And I've just kind of noticed, and I mean, Will, I know a lot of that. I know your own personal clinic. You get so many referrals, and sure, maybe you refer 15 people for 15 different things, and maybe only one of them returns that favor. But, when that happens every year, after a 20-year career, you have 20 great people
Sure.
who are continually, and I mean,
yeah.
Just talking
Every
about
referral I make out gives me 3 back. And I've found that no matter what what business I've been in, and I find that when I talk with other people about that, they find the same thing. Every time you refer somebody else's business, it comes back. It comes back threefold.
Yeah, and you may not know when it's going to happen, but it'll happen. And I tend to look at it from the garbage out, garbage in kind of principle. It's the same sort of thing. If you're just putting junk out there, then junk's going to come back. Well, if you refer good people or put out that positive energy, those same things will come back.
And I think we can also talk about this a little bit right now. With what I said in the very top of the show of you really do become like those 5 people you hang out with, and when you think about it, whether it's professionally, personally, you look at the different circles you move through, and you realize that core group you hang out with, how much they influence you and how much you influence them.
Very true.
Oh, I have a little theory that I came up with about a decade ago. It's just kind of an artificial categories of moving people into splitters and joiners, and everybody has the traits of both. But there are people who really do tend to pull people together, and there are other people who really tend to pull people apart. And I like this theory because it's really easy to use. It's really easy to adapt. If you think about people in your own life, you can really think very quickly who's a splitter and who's a joiner. And those if you hang around the joiners, the people who pull people together, there tends to be more going on there. Those are people who are going to help you. And splitters are always trying to climb over you. They're trying to use you to get to somewhere else. And Stephen Covey, in his book, has a thing about abundance mentality and people who are either there's enough for everybody or the hoarders who are always trying to get their own. And it's true that resources are finite. However, when we think about things in abundance mentality, we tend to not worry about gathering all our own and then spreading ourselves too thin, but doing the things we do well, giving things to other people that they do well, and it does really kind of come together. And in my world, the therapy world, when we refer to people who do things better than we do, it tends to work out. Things come back to us.
Well, even the best therapist in the world can only see 7 patients a day, really.
Yeah, 7 to 8.
Mm-hmm.
That's working a lot.
And at that point, you have the ability to find those people who you can share with, and who, when you've had a client successfully complete treatment, now instead of going, where's my next client, where's my next patient coming from, they're going to come from all those people you've helped.
And it's creating that team. And in order to create that team, the 2 things that we're playing around with that I really have spent a lot of time looking at, especially in my early career, what made people successful. You started the show talking about one of them, which is willing to listen. The other one is drive. A lot of people think IQ, talent, all of that. We all know incredibly talented people who aren't doing anything. And we all know people who are not very talented, who are doing, by their own standards or other people's standards really well. And it really comes down to that willing to listen. Early on, when I was playing a lot of music, one guy asked me, well, how do you get to play that scale so fast? And I said, well, I sit down, and I sit there for a couple of hours a day, and I play it slower, and I move the metronome up by clicks and start to play it faster. And he was looking for a trick. He got mad and walked away.
All right, well, guys, we've got to wrap it up today. Thank you so much for joining us on Live Unleashed. I'd like to thank Andy Martello for joining us. I'd love to thank my co-host, William Arendell. We will see you next week. Feel free to email me at any time at info@vegashypnosisshow.com, and we'll see you at Hypnosis Unleashed tonight at the Hooters Casino Hotel.